What is going on, guys? Noah Brewer here, back again with part 3 finally. I know that it's been a long time since part 2. I just been working, growing my companies, you know how it is. But I do want to say before I get into the details of these slides and start this case study that this is going to be very accelerated. I know that the last 2 parts of this case study were very kind of slow moving. It was kind of like day by day, you know, doing things very intricately, but this is gonna be a lot more accelerated. So in the beginning it's a little bit slower, but you know, we go from just having a few hundred K in sales all the way up to 1.8 million in this case study. And then, you know, the difference between 1.8 million and 2.1 million were not that much. So, you know, it was just a different ad account that we did at the end. So I think I'm going to stop the case study after this one. So we end at 1.8. If you really want to see me get it to 2.1, just let me know. But like I said, the same exact thing that we did to get to 1.8 was the same exact thing we did to get to 2.1. So I thought that, you know, this case study is basically going to cover from the point where we had a winning strategy up until the point where it was pretty much fully scaled, minus a few hundred K. So let's get right into it. So I don't know if you remember, but we left off on December 15th. We were doing about 20 to 25K a day in revenue, and we just started lookalikes. If you recall, we actually got our ad account disabled right after we started lookalikes, which was kind of unfortunate. So what we did was on December 18th, so a few days later, we got the ads turned back on. And usually when this happens, like when your ad account gets disabled and you have a big base of campaigns and ad sets that are working, I usually like to let it run for 2 days without touching anything if you can afford to. And I basically do that because it gives the ads time to like re-optimize, and some of them will come back better, some of them will come back worse. In this case, pretty much everything came back worse, you know. And it also messed up the tracking too. Like, I don't know how it could have affected the tracking, but so a couple of things happened. Once we got turned back on, our daily ad spend limit was increased, so we were no longer spending, you know, 5K a day. We were spending a little bit more. We were maxing out all of the budgets on our campaigns, so that could have also affected performance. So we had kind of 2 things working against us here. And another thing that happened was pretty much all of our ROAS dropped below 3. And like I said, it wasn't that bad because the tracking was off by quite a bit, as I showed in the last case study. But just like here's a little case study, here's a little screenshot to give you a good example of how it looked in the couple of days that we just let it run. So from here, I thought the best strategy would be to start retesting things, you know, maybe do a CBO or maybe do lookalikes again, try to get something to re-pop off. So moving to the next slide here, December 20th, so a couple days after it got turned back on, what we decided to do was just make a normal interest campaign at 20 bucks a day with new creative. So I believe what we did here was just a new video. So this is really just as simple as a new ad, because the original one was kind of all messed up with the account getting disabled and the spend limit changing. So this was kind of an attempt just to like re-spark it, you know, introduce something new that could help out. And as you can see, it got a 3.4 ROAS, which if you compare that to the very beginning is not very good at all, because we were seeing, you know, 10 plus ROAS in the beginning. But in this specific time, 3.4 ROAS was pretty damn good, mainly because everything else kind of tanked and tracking was down quite a bit. So the tracking wasn't as bad on this new campaign, and it was also doing pretty good. We basically waited 2 days and we decided it was best to make a couple CBOs. I don't know if you saw in the last screenshot, but the original lookalike campaign that we made, the all website visitors 180, was actually crushing it. Let me go back here. So yeah, the website visitors 180 has a 4.9 ROAS. So that was our highest ROAS campaign after we got re-enabled. So we thought it only made sense to make a CBO based on the lookalikes. You know, I'm pretty sure it was a top 5, 200 per day. And then on top of that, since we had this new creative working, we also made a CBO using the new creative, and we did both of them at 200 per day, just like we did in part 2. So essentially all we're doing at this point is just replicating what we already know works. We did all the testing in part 1. We found a little strategy that was working very well for us, and then in part 2 we kind of replicated it and went bigger with it. and then we kind of got a slap in the face. Ad account got re-enabled, and now we're kind of doing the exact same thing, just in kind of like in a different way. Now we're going towards lookalikes and new creatives, as opposed to just doing interests and scaling the interests. So moving into lookalikes on December 18th, so we let it run for a few days. The two CBOs did pretty good, but the lookalike CBO did the best. So of course, as you know, with the system that we were using, you duplicate the 200 per day CBO and you make it 500 per day. So obviously the tracking was really off. So I had to go back to the actual store to see what the actual revenue was. Just to give you an example, on the actual store, what you're looking at here, we had an 18K day, and the ad account was only tracking 11K. So that's kind of like, it was almost missing half of the sales. So just to give you an example, the 500 per day has a 3.25 ROAS. In reality, we could be looking at a 4 to 5 ROAS here, but just because the tracking was so off, it doesn't look as good, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. It was still good. So just to give some oversight on what exactly we were doing, which I know I've already talked about a few times. After getting disabled, we just kind of let it run for a couple days, or we tested a new creative, and then we had the lookalikes running from before. So since both of them did good, we made 2 CBOs at 200 per day, you know, just like a base CBO test, see if we can get some CBOs working again. And they ended up doing really good. So the lookalike one did the best, so we took the lookalike one and we made it 500 per day. So kind of just like an overview, it has now been 5 days since the re-enable of the ad account. Total ad spend was 35K since the re-enabling, and the total revenue was 134K. But tracked in the ad account was only about 90K. So you can see the tracking was maybe getting a little bit better, but it was still off. But I mean, even after getting disabled, spending 35K to get back 135K or 134K in, you know, 5 days was a pretty damn good return. But, you know, of course, with tracking issues, it could become hard to scale because you don't really know what's working, you don't know what's not working, so it could get into a bit of a sticky situation. Fast forward to December 25th, like I said, it's gonna move a little bit quicker from here. We finally did a retargeting campaign. I hope that you guys can see this. We have a ton of campaigns by now, so I imagine they're pretty small on your screen. Screenshot it and zoom in, please, if you want to analyze the numbers with me. But you can see the retargeting campaign had a over 6 ROAS. So, you know, with the mistracking, it was obviously doing very well. And at this point, we had 900K in revenue tracked, or not tracked, on the actual store. So we waited until almost 1 million in sales to start retargeting. You definitely should not do that. The reason we did is basically because our cold traffic was doing so good. The next best move was always just making a new cold traffic campaign. Looking back, we should have done it probably within the first couple weeks of launching, because we definitely left a lot of money on the table, but you know, whatever. So December 30th, right before New Year's, we finally cracked $1 million in sales. Started retargeting, started ramping up CBOs, replicating exactly what we did, and we finally hit the 7-figure mark. This was a obviously exciting day for this student. And for me as well, because I believe this was the 3rd store that I took to $1 million in sales. So believe it or not, it's also an accomplishment for me. New Year's came along, and of course we were just replicating, you know, making more CBOs, turning things off, you know, just basically in the maintenance phase. If you don't know about the maintenance phase, it's in my book, which I believe you can get from the link in the description, or if you see my YouTube ads, I promote it there quite a bit. We finally started a New Year creative. So this was kind of, you know, it's in the health and fitness niche. So the New Year's is kind of a good time for these stores, right? Like, people have New Year resolutions. So it was kind of that type of ad creative. You know, like the New Year is here, take a sale, something along those lines. And you can see that that pretty much brought us back to a 5 ROAS, which is how we were able to get from 1 million to 2 million, because we kind of re-sparked it with that New Year sale ad. And from there, it was very simple. We just kept on replicating exactly what we were doing. You can see here December 31st to February 24th. I don't want to sit here and bore you talking about each and every single campaign we made leading up to this point, because if you've already watched all 3 of these case studies, you already get the gist. You know, the CBO kind of tower that we climbed up for each campaign and each type of campaign, like with lookalikes, retargeting, interests, all those different things. We just kept replicating it, like every few days we made a new campaign, made sure to turn off the bad ones, and like I said, we hit about 1.89 million in sales at this point. And I know that the case study says 2.1 million. That was kind of like the total overview number. What happened after this point was this ad account got disabled, so we had to move to another ad account, and there's another ad account with a couple 100K tracked on it, I believe. So like I said, I didn't think it was worth showing in this case study because it's a whole other ad account, but you know, this is the gist. Like, it's all about, you know, in the very beginning, in part 1, finding a strategy that works really, really well for your account, and then literally just replicating it. And obviously you're going to have ad account disables, Shopify holds, PayPal holds, you know, things are going to come up along the lines, but at the end of the day, it's all about finding something that works and then just replicating it, doing it over and over and over, and hopefully if you can be consistent enough, then you start seeing very big numbers like this. So one more thing that I'd like to say before hopping off is, you know, looking at this chart, you can kind of get like an overview of what we did. So you can see the initial scale up to about 10K a day, which we did that in part 1. And then you can see kind of like above where the 19 is, that's where we got our ad account disabled for the first time. And you can see the little dip there, which obviously was a blessing in disguise, because as you can see right after that, we basically skyrocketed to, you know, 20K a day, 20 to 25K. And then you can see the other dip that goes down kind of like in the middle of the hill, kind of just like dips down in the middle of the hill. That was in the beginning of this case study where we last got our ad account disabled. And then when we got turned back on, you can see we had to turn some stuff off, and then just kind of slowly declined, mainly because we were turning things off, the ROASs were dropping, our cost per purchase was going up, which is not a bad thing. But you know, this is the maintenance phase. Almost every single full-scale store that you see is going to have a very similar chart to this, where it just kind of like goes up and then slowly back down. And you know, you got to be able to identify where you are in the scaling process. So you can see when we were peaking, that was like kind of right after we got disabled, and then you know, obviously things started dying out, so we kind of slowly went down. And then the New Year's creative kind of allowed us to maintain sales for a couple months after that. There's no magic to it here. I hope that this case study taught you a lot, and I'm excited to see if anybody goes and implements this exact method with their own stores and sees similar results, because I know with my 0 to 10K a day webinar, people actually did the exact same thing, and other people got to 10K a day just with that free webinar alone. So I hope that one of you or multiple of you do that with this. But as for this case study, this is Noah Brewer, and I'm out. Peace.